Well, hello, creatives, community, and kind folks out there. Welcome to RPG with DBJ. I am your host, DBJ, and today is Third Pillar Thursday. And as I always explain, for those who do not know, the third pillar of exploration deals with using the environment and exploring your tabletop RPG settings in much more of a physical manner. The first two pillars are associated with combat and social interactions, but as your self-appointed third pillars in the tabletop RPG community, it is my duty. No, it is my chosen calling to give a spotlight to the exploration pillar. Now, for those who do not know, um, I take the exploration pillar much further than actually dungeon delving and walking through wastelands and going through deep jungles and such, but to actually incorporate far more mechanical elements into our settings, much like a your favorite action movies and television shows, and the heroes and the adversaries are having a fist fight on top of a train or on the skin of an airship or deep underwater or in a collapsing building and all those kind of good things. Yeah, I am the explorational gangsta. In my pocket is a compass and a sextant. I don't ridiculous. Okay, this week, for those who don't know, this show is a bit of a video podcast of sorts, and we take a subject and we deep dive into it all week long, and we subdivide that into different categories. So we have Monster Monday, Discord Tuesday, World Building Wednesday, and today being Third Pillar Thursday. Now, our subject this week is a bit meta for this channel, and it's about trust. And we talked a lot about trust from players, trust from GM, trust from the entire group or on an individual level, trust in the story and that kind of business. But I was a little bit hard pressed, and actually I do this on purpose. Oh, heck yeah, hanging off my baggy pants. There you go, my sextant and compass. Thank you there, Red Dice Diaries. I appreciate it. The the idea here that a lot of times, due to you guys, we'll pick a subject, and I honestly have no idea where we're going to go with it. But once the camera starts, I think I know where we're going to head with this one. All right, so trust at the table top concerning exploration. Now, for me, on the game master side, um, I feel like, and this is something I had already picked before, to be what players are looking for is internal consistency. It's verisimilitude. It is the idea that when they are deposited into your world and your setting, that the rules, the the mechanisms, even if they don't understand how they work, and I don't mean this in a dice mechanism, but that the world works in a manner in which they expect. An example would be gravity and daylight and eating food and having normal, simple conversations with NPCs on the road, right? They expect that, oh, well, if I drop something, it will fall, or that if there are storm clouds, it might be a chance of rain. Now, you can very easily disrupt those expectations. They go to talk to an NPC on the road, and their face splits open, and a big giant tentacle comes out of where their head and shoulders should be, or they see storm clouds on the horizon, and they expect rain, and instead it starts to rain black necrotic lightning. Sure, you can disrupt those things, but if it is consistent in this world, uh, players then know how to deal with such a thing. Now, one of the problems that happens in a ton, sorry, I have co-hosts. They all have four legs and they're called cats. Um, the A lot of times what happens in role playing games because the environment, much like social interactions, can become there's almost an infinite number of one-offs that a lot of role-playing games either don't address it or address it very minimally. The idea that a storm could bring rain and lightning and mudslides and floods and douse fires and any number of things, that a blizzard could cause frostbite and reduce vision and pile snow and reduce and remove tracks on the ground and freeze that healing potion you have in your backpack and all. There's so many one-offs that it becomes its own thing, and so a lot of role-playing games either don't address it at all or address it very minimally using the engine that's appropriate to what you have, including, let's say, 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, usually defaulting to saving throw, ability check, skill check, maybe a skill challenge or two, and possibly a reduction in a specific statistic or movement rate or something like that. So what happens now is when your player characters engage in your environment and you've designed your setting, whether it's hyper gritty and bloody and dark, or it is very cinematic and high magic, and we expect to hear theme music behind every character's actions. It's that the world, either despite the rules or because of the rules, capital R, uh, acts and reacts to what the players do. Here's an example. We all know from the classic origins of Dungeons and Dragons and every iteration and every OSR, permutation, and Pathfinder, we all know that when a player jumps from a very tall height, they hit the mechanical version of terminal velocity, and we've always talked about, well, the player character is still going to survive, right? It's the damage of 20d6 damage, and my fighter or my character is of such a high level that, of course, I'll survive. If I hit the ground, not a big deal, right? And while we understand that the game has to have a rule, there is also this idea that, well, it doesn't make sense for my character to survive. And the the trust here is that both the narrative, and this is really important, that the narrative and the game master's interpretation of that narrative and the player's acceptance of that narrative, um, is a continuous line, uninterrupted line, or it does not break the immersion. We hear that term a lot, to allow the game to continue on. It's much like a player character having 80 hit points and being struck by 101 arrows, and then saying, well, this doesn't make any sense. Now what happens here is yeah, yeah, like a red dice says, yeah, if you're going to fall from a certain height, you're going to be, yeah, pizza, I don't know, chili, stew, a chunky salsa pancake. Yeah, why chunky salsa? I'm more of a medium or mild person. I don't like the hot, gives me too much ass fuel. But we accept that the game has to have a rule of some sort. It has to have some kind of rule. Hey, Rickard, and and so how do we interpret this? Now, one way, of course, is the fact that it's not the mechanism is undescribed, right? A lot of role playing games have undescribed mechanisms. In other words, they give you numbers and die rolls and things and tell you what the outcome is in a mechanical way, but they don't tell you what the narrative is. So, for example, we don't know in the case of a character falling from terminal velocity that, are they, is it the classic Rambo first blood maneuver where they fall through a number of tree limbs, or is it the classic falling into a bale of hay when they jump off of the building, or in a more modern sense, falling into a dumpster full of surprisingly soft trash, or into a pool of water, or any number of things. The classic Jackie Chan fall through about 3 awnings until they flip down on their head and then land rather roughly, but able to stand up and keep on moving. Um, Is this the case? Well, that depends on the narrative as well, right? Maybe much like player characters in 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, for example, that have arcane abilities that are undescribed, meaning the paladin has smite, the fighter has second wind, the rogue has sneak attack. But is that a skill or is that through magic? Maybe uh, more often than not, the character survives through some arcane means that we haven't described or narrated in the game. And so it's the idea. Thank you, Deadman. Deadman's like, the chunkiness doesn't alter the spiciness, only the texture. I see you've though chunky salsa is more common in in grenade combat. Yeah. I'm thinking, Deadman, you've had some experience with the with exploding internals and their texture and or spiciness. Yeah, it's like, this NPC ate beef stroganoff and had 1, 2, 3 beers. Yeah, Rambo first chunk. But again, even in current incarnation of the explanation of like armor class and hit points, we know now that despite the fact that we make fun of the fact that, oh, my character has 60 hit points and I can get hit with, I don't know, 8 arrows and still walk around, that it is also a description of endurance. It is a description of luck. And as Rickard has mentioned many times off screen, that maybe it's just a measurement of your luck running out, right? Like if you fall off of that mile high cliff and happen to survive, maybe it's not you impacting the ground, but some other form of interference happened that saved your rear end from the impact that was imminent, despite the fact that you lost those hit points, right? That hit points might not be a measurement, or isn't necessarily a measurement of your physical endurance and stamina and punishment, but it is the fact that when you reach 0 hit points, your luck has run out, and that you've narrowly escaped the death that should have happened to you, but some other third party or other element broke in. Um, yes, Rickard, we did say Rambo first chunk. You missed the first part about the hitting the ground at terminal velocity. Um, yeah, yeah. So one aspect of trust is that we together at the table are willing to accept. We're playing a game that we trust, that we all accept the outcome of the things that happen in the game when it comes to the environment. Now, um, a lot of times what happens when introducing the environment in a more of a mechanical aspect is that it can quickly turn from a benefit for the players, right? The rogue sneaks through shadows, the fighter kicks the does a flying leap into the ogre's chest and kicks him off the cliff, or the wizard casts a fireball and just so happens to ignite the barrels of oil, stacked behind the enemies in the warehouse. Then things start to turn bad. Uh, Rogue hides in shadows and then knocks into some old, I don't know, iron pails and makes a lot of noise. The fighter goes to kick the ogre off the cliff, and the ogre falls off the cliff, but the fighter is standing on the edge of the cliff, and it starts to break away, and then maybe the fighter falls into the raging river down below, or the wizard casts the fireball and ignites the oil, not realizing they're in a tight space, and the blast of flame you know starts barreling down both ends of the hallway back towards the party and the wizard, who just so happens to not be immune to the fire generated by, if not the fireball itself, but the ignited oil that you know ignites and fills the hallways with choking gas and smoke and things of that nature. Now, I'm describing that, but that depends on whether your game and your table even accepts that the aftermath, the side effect of the environment even has an effect in your game, right? Yeah, Kaya says the dungeon is a coal mine. Yeah, igniting some like noxious fumes, methane gases, or something of that nature, right? Now, you guys know I'm a proponent of using and abusing the environment, but that's not necessarily the case at every table. And so being consistent is a necessity, right? If my burning hand spell, which normally does not have any side effects to it, I mean, sure, some spells will say, oh, and ignites flammables, but do they really give you any direction as to what that means? Um, Generally, no. They don't tell you, well, if you ignite certain flammable objects, this is how much damage it does. Mainly because there's too many one-offs, right? Uh, Lighting a library on fire might be different than, going down into that coal mine and igniting one of those pockets of gases, which might be different than igniting barrels of oil, which might be different than trying to start a fire in a rainforest, right? So being not only being consistent but being fair in the players trusting the game master that they will adjudicate things in a neutral manner, because the environment can be very, very neutral. Again, being used and abused by the players, right? Players in flooding dungeon, as water begins pouring in from a crevice in the wall while they're fighting the enemy. Fighter says, "Hey, I don't know. I'm in a wrestling match with the ogre. Can I leg trip him and start to drown him down in the water that's at waist level?" And the game master goes, well, you know, choking and drowning a person in water sounds like a common sense thing to do when you're fighting for your life, but what are the rules for that? And so coming together and using the engine that is possible for your game, um, is very much a thing that I am fond of and am a proponent of. Like, fighter choking a guy to death, drowning him, hell yeah. Now, how are we going to do this? I don't know. Right? Ogre's like, I feel like my kid is being picked up. Yeah, well, I don't want to bring up punching ogres in the throat there, pet, but yes, sir. Now, Rickard says, that sounded like a secret phrase. NPC, yeah, NPC, rogue hides in shadow. PC, lone fighter on the field. NPC, opens hidden door. Right? So I'm the other part of that trust, and this is one of the issues, the meta issues about me being a proponent of encouraging everyone to, if not once but all the time, use the environment in their games, is this idea of the video game version of spamming, right? That, oh, well, if my fighter can easily take out the ogre by drowning him in water, well, I'm going to do this all the time. That's pretty easy, right? We see this often with players trying to circumvent rules, like, I'm going to use charm person or a friend spell and then feign death, and then when I use feign death on them, I'm just going to cut their throats. See how easy that is, right? I'm circumventing I'm trying to use the mechanisms of the game to achieve a result that the rules as intended probably didn't intend. And so by including the environment, now the game master might feel a little bit out of control, that they don't have as much influence, because again, with so many one-off situations, the game master is going to be very surprised by player characters doing different things, like, oh, I'm going to fire a lightning bolt up into the ceiling of the dungeon so that the cave collapses in, and then now you're stuck with this situation, like, well, what do I do? How do I adjudicate this? Am I going to be fair? Is this going to work? Well, first of all, the players need to understand that the game master is the final say. Like, don't bother playing in a game if you're going to stop the game for 45 minutes to argue, right? There's a time and place for it, but also it should be a conversation amongst everyone, simply because the thing is that we're going to decide this very quickly. far less than 2 minutes, right? And move on from this situation. And a great way to adjudicate this is to find other elements in the game. And if for no other reason, if you can't find it, just take something and reskin it, reflavor it, reuse it, and then move on so that you at least have a mechanism you can turn back to. Yeah, Ricker says, okay, on topic. One thing that is really relevant to trust and environment is rule of cool. And that's my thing, right? If far too often with new players, and you'll see this in a lot of like Reddit threads or like the Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition Facebook group that's got like hundreds of thousands of people in it or something. And a player will want to do something like I mentioned, drowning the, okay, we'll move away from the ogre. Drowning the minotaur, is that better? Cutting the tail off of the basilisk, setting fire to those barrels of oil, throwing a blanket or tapestry over the goblinoid's face and things. Yeah, yeah, pet ogre. Ogre's like, yeah, those guys are bastards, right? And you're going to get a lot of these one-offs, right? I'm going to cut off the thing's tail. Well, the game doesn't have a rule for cutting off limbs, right? I'm going to throw a tapestry over the guard's face. Well, is that a net? Is there a temporary blindness condition? Do they temporarily get disadvantaged because they can't see while the other player characters beat them around the head and shoulders in a blanket party? I mean, what do we do here? And I'm bringing up these situations on purpose, not just to add chaos, but to say that role-playing games should be built on a little bit of chaos. And that despite the fact that there are lots of games that have very intricate rules for them, you still can't account for the one-offs, right? It's very difficult to account for the player character that's like, I'm going to drop my fireball down a tight tube. And you're like, okay, how are we going to measure the volume of this thing? Like, shouldn't the flame volume like explode out of both ends or something? And then we start to, then you got the one player that's like, I'm a physics expert. I can do the calculations on dropping a fireball down a 6-inch tube that's 100 feet long and all this kind of business, and how much pressure there would be, and would a fireball suck up all the oxygen in a 9 squared 30-foot square room with like 9 5-foot, or I don't know, far more than 9 10-foot squares or something, whatever. Right? Like, then you get into like, is there smoke afterwards casting a fireball, and is there residue, and does it suck all the oxygen out, and does all this kind of business, wouldn't that make someone's lungs explode? We get into all the physics of the thing. But one of the problems, and Rickard brings this up about the rule of cool, is that everyone needs to come together and decide, like, is this going to be a very cinematic game? In which case, don't go into like physics and geology and geometry and trigonometry. Many games do not incorporate those things. For example, let's go to a basic longsword that does a die 8 damage. It doesn't cut off limbs. There are no rules for bleeding. There's no rules for causing some kind of internal bleeding or gangrene, or having the blade stuck in someone's ribs and you can't pull it out, and the fact that blades are designed to have like a groove in it so that it doesn't cause negative pressure after you stab someone, that it prevents you from drawing the sword back out of the person's body, and did you stab them through the spleen or the lungs, and all this kind of, none of that exists in the game. So we need to trust that on one level, we will acknowledge it, but on another level, maybe the game isn't designed for this, or we haven't come together to agree that we should have rules for this, and so maybe we should just let the realism slide away in our cinematic game and let it fade to the background. Now, again, we can go the opposite direction, but let me get into the chat here. Red Dice Diaries, I'm sorry, Deadman says, Gygax, the creator of D&D, stated that many spells could be used in ways that he hadn't originally thought of, and it was the job of the DM to run them anyway. Yeah, original Those of us graybeards, grognardians, remember a time when a spell like Fireball would just be like, yeah, you create a ball of fire. It does this amount of damage. It might ignite flammable objects. Done. Right? I mean, some of the spells were like one line, maybe three if you were lucky, and you had to go on that. OSR gaming, there was no such thing as a perception checks. Sure, a couple of character classes had like spot traps or hidden doors, but everything else was a conversation between the game master describing the environment. As a matter of fact, avoiding traps was not a matter of a detect trap skill or spell. Let me make a die roll and get this done. It was, do I feel one of the stones on the floor move? Do I feel air coming through a crevice? Do I have a wedge or a piton or something like that to wedge the door open, or do I have a wire clippers to cut the string or something? It was a conversation, and again, are we going to default to that or not? Now, Kaya says, what do you do if you don't trust or agree with your GM's assessment of a situation? Ergo, you are climbing an average mountain, and the GM says it will take 3 weeks, right? Again, it is game masters basically are benevolent dictators, right? Game masters in many ways have to default to the T'Challa, the Black Panther version of being a totalitarian government, right? Of the monarchy or patriarchy of game mastering, meaning all your players are basically your council as you sit upon your throne. I know I'm being facetious with that, with this analogy here, but it is listening to those trusted members of your council to give you an idea of how things should be. But as the game master, then if you are members of that council, you have to agree. You are agreeing when the game master or dungeon master is running the game that they are the final arbiter. So sure, you could say, well, 3 weeks to cross this mountain range, you know, on average, a skilled mountaineer could be able to do it in about, less than 7 days. Game master thinks and goes, yeah, but there's something you don't know. Let's split the difference. Let's say it takes a 10-day trip. At that point, you need to shut the hell up as a player, right? Because the game master is trusting you to trust them. So if you do have a problem with it, sure, you could table flip, but chances are I wouldn't invite you back to the game if you're going to be a pouty baby about it. But if you bring it up at the end of the game, sure, right? Sure. Rico says, it's like, quote, is there a chandelier I can swing on? And using a tapestry to hang an ogre, running on the wall to get around the enemy to flank them from behind. Yeah, if a player asks for those things, a lot of times because it's a one-off, I'll go, is there a chandelier? Well, since I didn't describe one, it doesn't mean there really isn't one. Hell yeah, let's put one in there and see what happens. As opposed to saying no because you're afraid of what the ramifications might be. Like, if I say yes, what are they going to do with a chandelier? I don't have stats for a chandelier, right? That kind of thing. Red Dice Diary says, I think a certain level of rules abstraction is necessary. Otherwise, every action requiring a roll would take forever to resolve. Yeah, it's the idea of how many die rolls does it take for you to drive to back and forth to work, right? Are you making 37 driving skill rolls? Are you making one? Or are we abstracting something out because it only involves this idea of us describing the thing? Remember, back in the day, Dungeons and Dragons used to have 1-minute rounds. Yes, guys, it took 60 seconds to accomplish one round of combat. And the idea in this was that there was a ton of back and forth and slashing and dodging and parrying and lots of randomization until the one attack was able to sneak through to injure the other person. So in 1 minute of time, and I get it, it was like, well, in 1 minute, I could move a lot further than like 60 feet of movement from like AD&D, but that was the idea, that it was more it was based on an abstraction of warfare and geared down into singular combat as opposed to squad based combat. And so it was this, and I still think of combat being that way, that there are a flurry of blows going on, not necessarily the monk version of it, but lowercase third flurry of blows until the person does the thing that has the thing happen, right? Yeah. Dead Man says, see GURPS Ultra Reality for the dice rolling for everything. Yeah. GURPS. Not complicated, but convoluted, right? Or the other way around. I'm not sure how to say that. Yeah, it's only a 3D6 system, but man, they've got a rule for everything. Yeah. Red Dice says, yeah, the old D&D spells had tiny write-ups for spells. Get that 10-foot pole out. Yep. It was tiny little things. And if you notice sometimes in modern gaming, especially far more rules intensive games, they'll state something like, oh, here's a light spell. And then the last 5 paragraphs are all the exceptions to the rule, right? Like, if you cast a spell, you can do this, except for on Thursdays, or something like that. If you cast a light spell, it can attach to an object. If that object is covered, it's like they have to state the thing, as opposed to everyone at the gaming table accepting the role that, of course, if you throw a dark tapestry over an illuminated object, the light goes out, right? It's like they have to mention it, as opposed to people accepting the fact that the narrative itself would state such a thing, and you don't need a die roll for it. You just need to take the glow rock and put it in your pocket, right? Yeah. Yeah. Ricker says, there's also a thing the players can be better at when it comes to trust. Don't ask if you can see item X. Just tell the DM what you want to do if you find item X. That way the DM can say, okay, item X doesn't make sense that you'll find there, but item Y can be found that you can use for the same effect. A perfect example of what Rickard is talking about is player characters go into tavern. Okay, we the social contract of trust is we accept the generalized items we would find in a tavern: chairs, tables, bottles of alcohol, maybe other individuals in there, maybe things hanging off the wall. Now, we can get very specific. What kinds of alcohol? That might be a little into the weeds. We can get very specific as well. Exactly how many people are inside of the tavern? What's the exact measurements, both in height and width? What is the exact weight of a table? Okay, maybe that's getting a little bit into the weeds. But if a player character says, I'm going to go up to the bar, and we didn't even describe whether there is even a bar in this place, and grab an empty glass and then ask the bartender to pour me a stiff one from the top shelf, well, we're accepting that the player character has inserted a bartender, a bar, a glass, a bottle of alcohol that was never described before. But we have come to accept that these things, these props even, are in the game. And I would dare say that one level of trust, I love bringing up movie analogies, is that an actor who is in a movie might say, I think it makes sense for my character to have certain props in this movie scene without disrupting the director, the game master's storyline, right? Like Tom Cruise can say, you know what, it makes sense for me to have a cigar or a leather jacket on, or that my hair should be windblown, but may or may not say, you know what, I should have on a clown costume, right? And you're like, dude, we're filming Jerry Maguire, right? You're supposed to be yelling, like, show me the money. And he's like, yeah, but wouldn't it make sense if I had like a full clown costume? I mean, the red nose and the big floppy shoes, right? That's where you start, as a player character, you start breaking the trust of the theme of what we're talking about. It's very different if you're playing an ultra gritty Viking themed world in which I'm going to open up my backpack and pull out a nasty piece of hardtack and start eating it, as opposed to some high cinematic, high fantasy realm where I pull out a silver chalice and pour myself some golden fluid out of my chalice magically and drink down the golden draught down my throat. Right? There's a difference. Um, Red Dice says, I agree. You can't describe everything in a scene, but on the other hand, you can have a little bit of give and take. If I describe a tavern and a player says, "Is there a bar stool here? Can I grab it?" I'd be like, "Sure, there is," and the game can move on. I'm so much with you, and this is where we start breaking. I start moving from game masters and dungeon masters to the players and the trust. Right, that I'm a person that where I don't want my players to keep asking me permission to do a thing. I just want you to tell me you are doing the thing, right? So for my default, I don't want a player to ask me, is there a bar stool? I just want you to say there is one, and I'm going to grab the bar stool and pull it up to the table, right? You don't have to ask me that permission because I'm trusting that you as a player are invested in the theme and the setting, the feeling, what would be here, as opposed to the player character saying, "Oh, I'm in a tavern. I'm going to go up and pull an automatic rifle off of the back counter and aim it at a person." And you're like, "Automatic rifle? This is medieval. That makes no sense, dude. Like, what are you really trying to do that? Hey, Legally Blind, what's going on here, man? Welcome back. You're always welcome here." Cameron, what's going on? Cameron says, that's a trippy question. I would say that the arbiter or rules would be called the GM. I think you playing the Lich without playing anything else or being an arbiter of the rules would be a player. Like play a Lich equals against the party. Yeah, yeah. We long ago, Caius brought up this idea of like, I believe, would a Lich understand the rules of the game? Would be intelligent enough to understand the rules of the game and how the rules of the game works by, say, killing a cleric. If a cleric got dropped down to like 0 hit points, would it make sense for a Lich to know to do that? Taking advantage of the idea of how um, time management works in a game. That was man, shit. We could do a whole week on that one. Cameron goes on to say, mixing things up is awesome. Don't worry about classifications. I just think it was just fun to think about for me. I would like a GM. Oh, you're going on about the Lich. Kaya says, I would like a GM to GM a Lich trying to kill the PCs, but I'd like to have a trusted player as an arbiter or referee to make sure the game is running fairly. We often don't talk about the idea of a person who isn't a dungeon master being the arbiter of the rules, which is a thing. Harry, seriously, fine. Cup of coffee, maybe two, with some almond milk. Need to sponsor this channel. Anyway, thank you very much, Harry. The only other grognard out there older than myself. I really appreciate the super chat. You're very kind. It's uh, there is this sometimes very unspoken idea that the players are allowed to insert things into a setting that normally wouldn't exist, and yet the game master then accepts the fact that because it's been inserted, it now becomes a real thing. Um, Really savvy players will do this in a manner in which some game masters, it will throw them off if you're inexperienced or you're afraid of the chaos, but it can happen. I used to play with a guy who random NPCs, he would just assume into being that he had a past relationship with them, right? I remember running a game and I had no idea what I was going to do. So I did the typical bandit stop you on the road, right? I picked some random goblinoids and I was like, okay, the orcs stop you on the road, bandits, and they go to rob you. And the first thing he said was, have after having watched Empire Strikes Back, was like, dude, I'm so sorry. I know I owe you money, but I swear I'll get it for you. And boom, it instantly set off something in my head, and I was like, wow. And didn't even ask permission. didn't say could I, just automatically brought a thing into reality. Yes, my character knows these people, and the money they were demanding has to deal with a debt that I owed them. And all of a sudden, we had a brand new story, and I really love that. Red Dice Diaries continues to say, I think that if the Lich has seen a cleric before and thinks, I don't fancy any of that undead turning shizzle, that he's perfectly justified to waste the cleric. I mean, if anyone understands that looking dead isn't the same as being dead, it's going to be a Lich. Hell yeah. Hell yeah. Listen, there are some big bads in the game that are, I feel, are of a level that knows how the game operates, right? They know that you're about to use a healing word. They know, like, mind you, you can recontextualize it, right? But there's some baddies out there. I'm looking at you, ninth level of Hell Fiends. I'm looking at you, I don't know, 687th level of the Abyss, and I'm looking at you, Liches and Ancient Dragons. They've been around long enough to understand that, uh, you know, you fight enough adventuring parties, you know that one person carrying that weird symbol around their neck and spouting out religious doctrines is probably going to bring their allies back from the unconscious, right? Oh man. Oh, that's it? You're only going to be 40 this year? Yeah, I got you beat by 10. uh, Ogre's like, but not ogres. Oh, let's see. Legally blind says, oh, thank you very much, Harry. The Legally Blind says, Glass Cannon Podcast hires a rules lawyer to help their flow. Um, yeah, the idea of having another person, now they could be another player, but having another person who knows the rules is a great help, especially if you want to take your time to run a game you've never run before, or run very limited, or you've read the rules but it hasn't ingrained in your skin, you know, to have someone else who knows the rules and you trust that they will be an arbiter of the rules for good or bad is a great thing. We're all a little bit older here. Legally Blind says 46 this year. Wow, you guys are catching up to me at some point. Um, oh man, Cameron says, Kaya says, I love it when players understand a setting well enough to bring things that add to the setting, not exploiting it, but deepening it. And I can't agree with you more, Caius, especially if you, okay, and a good example is, let me bring up some Harry's like 74 this year. 74 years young, dude. Wow. Man, you played role-playing games in their heyday, in the prime of your life. That's awesome. Um, but the idea, I'm going to spit out some words here. Star Wars, Middle Earth. Um, I'll bring up, what are some other great settings that have their own Pacific Rim, mechas versus kaiju, like all of these intellectual style properties or settings or themes have their own environmental dialogue, right? They if you're in the Millennium Falcon, you know the hyperdrive is going to bust. If you're in Star Trek, you know you're going to use the transporters, or you know there's going to be aliens with that are basically humans with plastic things stuck on their face. You know these things, and so embracing what exists in that world. And if you're playing Star Trek and a player character says, I'm going to walk down to the to ask for a cup of Earl Grey hot, and the game master has never stated that there is a nano fabricator on this particular experimental ship, then you go, well, it makes sense for it to be there. I'm not going to say no. Yeah, of course you do that, right? Of course you have that. Hell, we know in a lot of games, sometimes we hand wave equipment away. I know I've done it plenty of times. It's like, don't worry about buying equipment. You probably have what you need. There's plenty of games that do that, where they go, you know what? Don't even write down equipment. You have a die that measures your equipment, or a number or a percentage or something. And you've got 6 pieces of equipment. When you pull out one piece and call it rope, now you've got rope. Let's just, uh, there are many games that circumvent the idea that you need to pre-establish that something has already been in the environment, and you just accept the fact that there is something in the environment, and you're going to use it. You go into an old library. Of course, there's probably some kind of illumination, a lantern, a candle, a torch. I don't know, maybe you don't want a torch in the library, but yeah. Oh man. Caius goes on to say, brilliant. PCs have relationships. The GM shouldn't be the only one who is allowed to introduce past relationships. Hell yes. There's nothing better than a player that says, goes into a small town that's been undescribed by you, and the player says, you know what? I haven't seen my uncle in a long time. I wonder if he's still running the blacksmithy. I'm just like, hell yes. Because guess what? When you yes and, remember, yes and has those dots at the end. It's never a period. So who's to say that that relationship is a good one? Or what has happened to their uncle since they haven't seen them so long, right? You're already creating a story. Rickard brought this up the other day as well. Like, when you start establishing relationships, for good or bad, now you can start pulling on those threads, and it didn't exist before. And that makes the world that much far more rich, right? Um, Pet Ogre's like, well, actually, it depends on which era you play in Star Trek. Yeah, Ogre, you pulled the well actually on me. Yeah, you haven't seen my well actually video. It's a long time ago. Maybe we might do a whole week of well actualisms. Maybe not. I don't know. Um, yeah, Kai's goes on to say, especially with NPCs who've obviously just been created, a lot of times creating that web of interaction on the fly, especially with NPCs. Here's something that's quite meta as well. Okay. Brings up Firefly. Legally Blind brings up Firefly, which is a great great television show, as in Serenity movie, that's cult classic, right? But this idea that okay, let's see if we there is a meta version of doing what we're talking about incorporating relationships, and that this is this, okay? If you want to add energy to the table, you want to add a synergy to the table as a player, we all know this, and this goes back to trust. Sometimes we know the game master is getting flustered by something. Now, you could be an a-hole and call that out, right? When the game master runs an adventure and you realize he pulled the plot from Die Hard when you assault the tower, you could either A, call that out and go, this is the movie Die Hard, blah, 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 or you can go along with it and fall into the trope, right? You could say, oh, you're trying to pull horror jump scares. My character isn't scared. Or you can embrace the horror theme and go, hell, my character's going to run upstairs or run into the basement. you know, I'm going to run out to the car that happens to not be able to start. Right. I actually played in a game where we were in the typical dark woods cabin, and one of the players, who was a little bit disruptive, ran outside and was like, well, I'm going to run out to the car that we came in. And we had that heartbeat stop, like, oh shit, we didn't even mention it. And he immediately looked around the table, and you could see it was 1 heartbeat, 2 heartbeats, 3 heartbeats. And he was like, yeah, I go to the car and the car doesn't start. And we all looked at each other and was like, yeah, it doesn't make sense that the car doesn't start, but that's a trope in horror movies, right? So within the confines of this setting, of course the car doesn't start, right? And we kind of laughed it off because we knew what happened, because we hadn't considered it. And the player was like, he was a very common sense kind of person. Like, why the hell would I be in a dark woods in a place I don't know with no cell phone coverage, I'd just get in the car and leave, right? I'm going to go get the cops. But we had to do the thing. And so one part of synergy as a player is understanding maybe the game master didn't quite create the NPC you were thinking of or wasn't quite prepared. So what do? You make the name. You describe the NPC. You describe your relationship with the NPC to facilitate the energy of of the game master, right? Instead of just sitting there folding your arms and going, "You didn't create the NPC, and I know you didn't, and you're stupid." GM. Do you want to be that a-hole and not get invited back in the game, or do you pick up the baton in the relay race that is our gaming? Are you an improver? Are you a person who's into improv, understands the energy that they're giving back and forth with the people they're acting with, and you as a player picks up the baton and goes, "Oh yeah, the blacksmith's got a big thick beard, but it's gray now because I remember when it was black." And you're like, "Nobody knows what the blacksmith looks like. I guess he does have a beard now, and it's all gray, right?" Yeah. Um, yeah. Legally Blonde says, playing Kingmaker in Pathfinder, my character ended up marrying an NPC who gave an early side quest. See, a callback to an older NPC is a great thing, or going out of your way to establish some rando NPC into your character's background. Like, yeah, when I go back to the village, I'm going to find that specific NPC because I've now established a relationship. And maybe if the game master completely forgot about that NPC and it was like, oh, oh wow, you brought them back, sure, you know. Oh man, Legally Blind says 3 books later they had a kid. See, now isn't that sweet? Like, and I don't mean sweet like, oh, I mean like, yeah, they have a kid, and how cool would it be for that kid to become your next player character? And you have an NPC, a background, your past character that may have retired. Now they become part of the world. God, I love that stuff. Yeah, and Kingmaker is definitely that kind of, you know, my character's not going to go out in a blaze of glory, but actually is going to retire and make a kingdom or a guild or establish a stronghold or something like that. Kai goes on to say, if you're going to play against your GM, why bother playing? Well, we talked about the fact that there's an unspoken type of player who takes joy in doing nothing but disrupting other people's energy, right? Um, the prototypical dungeon master shows up and goes, "Great, I have an adventure on the Isle of Dread," and the player goes, "Well, my character doesn't like sailing and doesn't like to swim and is afraid of water. I'm not going." And you're like, "Dude, we." He spent 20 hours making this adventure, or bought X1, the module, and reskinned it to 5th edition. Make the effort to go, or state up front, sure, my character doesn't want to go, but I'm opening up the door so you guys make my character go and then get to the friggin' island, right? As opposed to being the ultimate contrarian. Thank you, Kitty. And not giving that energy. And I agree with you, Kai. It's like, why bother? Yeah, thanks, Kitty. I love you too. Kais goes on to say, surprise them, yes, but in a good way that increases the enjoyment, right? Surprising the game master with creating a predisposed relationship with an NPC, surprising the game master with using the environment but not abusing it so that you start spamming the environment and stuff, because technically this is Third Pillar Thursday, right? But all in all, we're talking about the meta version of trust. So anyway, guys, we are coming to the end. Thank you, Dead Man, for reminding everyone over there in Twitch. And of course, the show is on YouTube and our Discord server down in the boiler room if you join our Discord server. So we are starting to come to the end. Lastly, Legally Blind says, and having that family makes that character fight for the kingdom and their home. Hell's yes. Thank you, Dead Man. That what greater what greater reason to fight for something than to have a reason to do it? Fighting for family, if not just your country, is a great reason to do a thing. So thank you very much, guys. Thank you so much. I went a little bit longer than I wanted to. I do have to head off to work, but thank you for joining me. Tomorrow is Future Friday, where we talk about transhumanism, but specifically, we're going to be very meta about this and talk about science fiction. Let me give you a hint. We're going to bring up things like Total Recall and the television show Altered Carbon. We're going to talk about trust in the concept of manipulating a player character's memories of a thing, manipulating their body, manipulating virtual realities, and the idea of circumventing their expectations of who they are. The Jason Bourneism of gaming. So, guys, thank you very much. Join me tomorrow. Have a great one. Bye. Thanks for watching.